Right, so Dane Cobain, thank you very much for joining me at short notice.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I wanted to ask first, is Dane Cobain your real name or is it just a really cool sounding pseudonym?
I get asked that quite a lot actually, but it's a good question because there is a story there. So I was originally called Dane Ashley Bygrave. That was like my birth name. But basically, when I started getting into writing, it was it was about 2004, 2005, and kind of like some of the more like formative days of the internet. So like pre-social networking and stuff. So it was the username I used to use on like discussion forums and like MSN Messenger and stuff.
I remember that.
Just because it rhymed. So like Dane Cobain was quite a good username for those. And then when I started writing, I felt as though I needed a pen name. And so Dane Cobain was just quite natural out of that. And then it got to the point where that was just what everybody knew me as. And like people didn't know my actual surname. So then when I was 16, I changed it by deed poll and I changed it to Dane John Cobain, purely because it was the same amount of money to do the paperwork no matter what. So I was like, well, I might as well change my middle name as well. So obviously we have the Cobain from Kurt Cobain. So the John is for John Lennon.
I was thinking, did you just think, right, I've had a Kurt Cobain phase and I'm just going to stick with it. I've committed to it. So that's what we're doing.
Well, that's kind of what's happened now, because obviously like it just is my name as well. So it's kind of funny because, I've grown up, because as well, it was like back in those days. I mean, the way I got into writing was I learned guitar and I was like writing songs and stuff. And then I went like songs, poetry, journals, and then kind of went from there to like short stories. So it made a lot more sense for the Cobain thing then, because I was making this like, quite grungy Nirvana inspired music. But now it's just sort of I guess like a hangover of that. But I think it works quite well. And it's quite a memorable name as well, because Dane's like a weird name to begin with. And like that has always been my first name as well. And then just having that kind of unusual first name and then the surname that rhymes with it, I think it's good for branding and it's good for search engine optimization as well.
Yes.
There's a guy called David Meerman Scott who's like a marketing thought leader. And the reason he goes by David Meerman Scott is because there's an American astronaut called David Scott. And so he specifically uses Meerman, which I think is his middle name. And it's a really weird middle name as well. But he deliberately uses that to make sure that if people are looking for him, he stands out from the results about this astronaut, which I think is quite funny.
Yeah, I mean, about a username, a pen name, I go by AB Frank because that's a little bit catchier than Alex Griffiths.
Yeah.
It's a bit clunkier to say and to write down.
Exactly, yeah. Well, it's good as well because it kind of preserves a bit of the mystique. Like I've always thought with the initial pen names, because I think that's why J.K. Rowling is J.K. Rowling actually, is because I think she was going to be Joe Rowling or Joanne Rowling, and then basically the publishers were like, oh, no one will read fantasy written by a woman, which very like 1995 or whenever it was that she got signed up. But like I've known a lot of, I actually have a friend, I won't give his real name, but his pen name is J.G. Clay, and he's a British Asian author, and he did something similar. Basically, he wanted a more kind of anglicized name because he does write occasionally like Asian inspired horror, but he doesn't want it to be like the focus of all of the questions and all of his work and stuff like that. But that's why I think like those initial names, they do give you like a certain amount of distance.
Yeah, definitely. So you've got this really like romanticized sort of lifestyle because you've got the freelancing going on and YouTube and your own books and whatnot. So give us like a 90-second sort of origin story of like who you are and what you do, and then how you got to where we are in the present day.
Well, it's funny because I guess I wouldn't think of it as romanticized, but like you are right. It's one of those things as well though, because I think this is kind of one of the big myths of writers, is like this idea if you can make a living from writing, you've made it, which is kind of true, but it also kind of isn't, because I think most writers, even the ones who do make a living, most of them don't necessarily make it just from book sales. So they're still doing like freelance commissions, or they're having to, do like speaking gigs and all this kind of stuff, or like mentorship and all that. So for me to live the real romanticized life would be for me to be earning enough money from book royalties that I can just basically do what I want. But that kind of fits into this 90-second thing though, because I guess my goal has always been to
take as long as you like, by the way.
Well, yeah. Well, so the goal has always been to like to make a living from writing, I guess. When I was like 17, 18, I was studying computing at college, because that was sort of the other thing I was good at was like computery stuff. And I very nearly did web development, but I changed. I think it was like through clearing the university system. Like I went for creative writing, just because I knew it was something that I really loved. And I kind of looked out because it happened. I graduated in 2011, and that was just as like all blogging and, you know, content marketing was really taking off. So I got like working. My first job was social media marketing in a PR agency, and then it was like specifically social media marketing for like a creative marketing agency, I suppose. But I don't really like marketing, so after that, like I'd been working. I probably worked for other people for like 6-7 years, something like that. And during that time, I was like, always been writing my books, you know. I started my book blog, socialbookshelves.com, in about 2013. And that was purely because I was working in like social media marketing. So I was like, it'll probably help my career if I have a blog, you know. And so like just kind of carried on going from there. And I had some really cool opportunities to do that actually. And so I suppose through like my book blog and my writing, that's when I started just my like indie publishing career, and you know, I signed with this like small press and stuff. But that sort of started allowing me to build up my like portfolio, I guess. And because from like where I'd worked at these marketing agencies, typically there's like the creative side and the account handling side. So the account handlers do all the stuff, like all the, you know, all the quotes and all the invoicing, and they talk to the clients, and the creatives are supposed to just, you know, get on with doing the work basically. But because my role was a bit weird, I was going into more meetings than most people, because like other people didn't really know how to sell social media marketing very well at the time and stuff. And so I got like a lot of experience of like presenting to people and doing like all the more business side. So it just meant that like when I decided I wanted to go freelance, I kind of had the tools and the know-how available to do it. And so I just sort of grew that slowly through freelancing websites and like through word of mouth. And then, yeah, about 2-3 years ago, I quit my job. I actually asked them if they'd put me down to part-time hours, and they refused. So I just quit.
Yeah, up yours.
Yeah, basically, because it was like, I think I was already earning about the same. So I was doing like a full-time job there, and then like a part-time job freelancing, and I was earning about the same from doing both of them. And so me asking them if I could go down to part-time would have been like for me just to phase it out slowly, make it easier for them, and like at the same time make sure I was still having enough work. As it turned out, it was fine anyway, so I haven't really looked back. But there are things like I miss, because I don't know, like it's nice to be in an office with a lot of people and stuff. So I guess that actually brings us to like, it was probably around about that time. It was when I left that job and went freelance. That was when I adopted Biggie, my cat. And
you adopted him?
Yeah. I adopted him from, I can't remember the website now. It was whatever like the British equivalent of Craigslist is. One of those sites anyway, like where just people would put up the notices and whatnot. So I'd kind of just adopted the cat. I'd just gone freelance, and it was probably roughly around then I started booktubing. I'd been watching for years. I'd actually been watching BookTube at my first job, you know, just on my headphones in the background of the working day. So I thought I'd sort of jump in and sort of start doing that as well. But I suppose the other thing that's been recent as well is just before the pandemic kicked in, I was due to start working at my local art centre, which is literally, it's that way, about 100 meters, something like that. So it's just around the corner from me. And they do like, I've been going to like their open mics and their various events and stuff. But I'd been volunteering a little bit and working behind the bar. And so the bar manager actually went on maternity leave. And she was due like end of March, early April. So the plan was I was going to take over running the bar while she was on maternity leave. And I thought that'd be good for me because it's like a new skill. And if I ever want to go traveling, for example, it means even if the writing work dries up, I can still, I can still go and get a job in a bar somewhere. But then obviously the pandemic kicked in, so I got made redundant before it even started. And then during the first lockdown, their marketing manager left. So I ended up joining them as kind of a cross between the like bar manager for maternity leave and the marketing manager. But that's really helped in kind of, as I was saying, like the thing that you tend to miss about working in an office is the people. So it's nice that I've got like the work I do at the art centre is probably like 20-25% of my workload or something. So it's not like I can still do all of my freelance stuff, but then it does give me some sort of social engagements and even like Zoom meetings and stuff that I probably wouldn't normally have.
Yeah, I mean, social engagements are quite few and far between, aren't they, with the last 6 months, 7 months?
Well, this is the thing though as well, is because before that, because I was working from home and writing's quite solitary, even then I wasn't really seeing that many people. I'd see my friends and stuff, but during the work day, I guess I wouldn't see many people. So that's why when lockdown happened, I was like, well, this is just kind of normal for me, really. But in a way, it's actually kind of helped, and I've probably seen more people because people have been spending more time doing like Zoom calls and stuff. And I'd never really see people face to face anyway. So I think the fact that people are spending more time doing Zoom calls actually means that I have more like digital interaction time, because they're spending more time online than they would have done, I guess. Yeah.
I should say, if you keep seeing me drink this, I'm drinking 7.5% drink called Dragon Soup.
Very nice. Has that got a handle on it, or is that just how you're holding it?
No, it's just I was holding it so my fingers didn't cover the thing. Yeah. This is a flavoured fermented malt beverage. I only came across this because I watched your one of your vlogs from like back in just before lockdown or around the start of lockdown, when you drank Frosty Jacks and you were hungover, you said. And I was looking in there to see if Frosty Jacks was still about, because that rolled back the years.
Yeah.
And what made you get that? Did they not have any white ace?
No, I think they had white lightning there as well. But that was, well, Frosty Jacks was what I used to drink as a kid, I guess. Sort of between the ages of about 17, 19. I went through a cider phase, and then I was drinking pretty much like straight vodka, like Asda Smart Price vodka. It was horrible, but it was cheap.
That's what we did at uni.
Then I moved on to, by uni I was on lager, although I did try and homebrew some cider at uni, and it was not very nice at all. But the Frosty Jacks, that was about second or third week in lockdown, and I'd got some eBay parcels just to post. So I went to a place I'd not normally been to before, and they just happened to have it. And then I basically did, like, as you were saying, like I sort of saw it and was like, oh wow, I haven't thought about that for years. So I had to get some. But I do know actually they have a Facebook page, because every now and then their Facebook page pops up in my newsfeed. So I must have liked it at some point. Because I've seen them like giving away like Frosty Jacks like hoodies and stuff, and I'm like, I would love a Frosty Jacks hoodie.
Yeah. So I've seen your schedule, and I've been watching your reading vlogs. I've gone back to like March, and I'm going to work my way forward a bit. I remember you mentioned at some point that you do things in like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So do you have any sort of advice about managing the lifestyle that you have, being freelance and working your own hours?
No, I'm probably like the worst person to ask about that. I mean, as we were saying before we started the interview, I mean, it's 5:30 UK time, and I've been awake for about an hour and a half or something like that. So I'm a bit of a night owl. I mean, it does help that a lot of my clients are international as well. So, and I mean, the thing that I guess with me is that I'm just always working. So it's just a question of what I'm working on. So as you say, the 45-minute chunks thing, and this definitely won't work for everyone, and it makes me sound super OCD. It's even got a name. I call it the schedule. It's capital T, capital S, because it's, proper noun. And basically I have like my 3 main categories for stuff when I'm doing my own things. So I've got like computer stuff, which would be like replying to emails. It might be formatting blog posts. It also counts like editing books as well, because I'm sitting there in front of the computer just going through the manuscript. I have tidying, which covers like cleaning my house, looking after the cat. Also like cooking food goes into that. And then writing, which is, fairly self-explanatory. And the idea is that every 45 minutes, I have like 3 15-minute chunks. So I'll do 15 minutes of computer stuff, 15 tidying, 15 writing. And then during the workday, actually, I do something similar. So I just do 5 minutes of each, just to, putter around a bit and to get a bit done during the workday. And then I'll do half an hour of work. Normally I'll pick out a client and spend half an hour at a time on them. But really that's just for me. I guess for like variety's sake, I get really bored if I do the same thing for too long. So I'd rather like chip away at, I don't know, housework or whatever. I'd rather do it a little bit at a time than just spend an hour and get it all done. So it's partly because of that. But also, I guess, Well, I was watching. Do you watch? I think his channel's called Page Nomad now. Cam.
Oh no, I've
guy.
seen the channel, but I've not watched him yet. No.
You should watch him. He might be up for an interview because I interviewed him for my radio show actually. But he's a good guy. But he did a video recently reacting. There's been a video going around where a few author tubers have said that like writer's block isn't real, and so he did his response to that. And kind of my response to his response is that I personally have never really had writer's block. But I do think it's real because I've seen people experience it or whatever. I think maybe definitions change and stuff. But kind of the reason that I don't get like a block is because of these like chunks that I work in. So if I do, and I've always got multiple projects on the go as well. So, if I get stuck in the book I'm writing, I'll just switch over to a different project for a bit. And then I come back like a month later and, I've sort of come up with a solution to it or whatever. But also with writing, I just find there's the Ernest Hemingway quote, which is like, there's nothing to writing. All you do is sit at a typewriter and bleed. And that's pretty accurate. Like, I think even if you do have like writer's block and you don't know where something's going and you're just really stuck with it, just spending the time in front of the keyboard, trying to do something with it, it kind of works. Like eventually you get through it and you might not even know how you did it. So I think that's where like writer's block kicks in a lot, where people are like, it holds you back. You don't want to invest that time. You don't want to spend 3 hours writing something that might not work. But, it might be that actually to get through it, you need to spend 3 hours finding out what doesn't work and then spending 2 hours doing it again. But if you sit there and spend that time, you will get through it,
Yeah, this goes nicely into like the booktube and the book type questions that we're going to get onto. But yeah, on writer's block, I'm not a seasoned writer by any stretch. But I always think if I ever get stuck, then there's times when I don't want to cook a meal. I just order something instead. Yeah. I've not got cooking block. Or there's times when I don't want to go to the gym. I've not got exercise block. Yeah. I'll just leave it and I'll do it another time.
Yeah. I suppose there is the element of it because you can get stuck to a point where you actually don't know what you need to do. So with something like the gym, it's like, you need to go to the gym. You just don't have the motivation or whatever, where I guess like a true writer's block or whatever would be when you're really motivated, you're psyched, you're sitting in front of the computer, you're really excited about writing and you just have no idea actually what to do, if that makes sense. So I guess there can be different elements to the problem, I suppose.
Yeah, so you're a booktuber like you mentioned before, and you have a lot of reviews going up. You have a lot of just videos more broadly that aren't reviews. Like how much do you read? How much can you get done in like a week?
Well, it sort of depends. Like a book like this, I'm currently reading A Piano in the Pyrenees by Tony Hawks. And this is it's humorous non-fiction, so it's pretty easy to read. It's like fairly standard, about 300 pages. And that'll take me I could probably get 3 of those done in a week, I would say. And some stuff like Agatha Christie, I've been whizzing through those really quickly. But I think on average, I tend to hit around 20 books a month. Maybe some I've done more. But it also depends because I read anything. So there are times when I read like children's books, for example, and like I'd still count them as a book read. So, and also like with rereads, with audiobooks, I go through phases. So I think this month already, I think I've already reread 2 or 3 books by audiobook, whereas I probably won't again for another 6 months, and then I'll listen to another 2 or something.
Yeah, I'm not very consistent with audiobooks. I find it hard to follow along. I sort of think, how long have how long have I not been listening to this for?
That's it. And
just start the chapter again.
It depends, doesn't it? Because on like the software you're using and like how it turns out. Because some of them I've had they've been like an audiobook and it's just one MP3 file that's like 6.5 hours long. And so it's like, well, if I miss something, it's actually really hard to just skip back 20 seconds or whatever. Like you try and skip back 20 seconds and suddenly you're 10 minutes back and so but also that's partly why when I read audiobooks, I only use audiobooks for rereads. So I never use them for the first time read. And for precisely that reason, because I miss stuff. So if I'm doing a reread, I don't feel as bad if I do miss stuff, or like I'll know that I've missed it anyway. And, like, for example, if I were to reread Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or something, it's like, I could miss little details out of the audiobook, but I'd still know where we were in the plot and what was happening,
If anything, you'd probably pick up the stuff you missed the first time round.
Yeah. That's kind of the hope, yeah.
Do you have any like speed reading techniques, or are you just naturally quick? Do you just naturally get through them?
Well, so when people ask like, how do you read so much? My answer is always that I'm quite a fast reader, and I spend a lot of time reading. And I think being a fast reader, I think, is just one of those things that like naturally happens. I think the more you read, just you slowly get better and better at reading, and you don't necessarily like notice it. Having said that, it does depend what I'm reading as well, because something like Agatha Christie, because the language is so simple, it's super easy to sort of speed read it effectively, because you don't get lost. Whereas if you're reading like William Burroughs or something, it's like you actually need to think about like what you're reading. So you know, I mean, I guess you could, it depends how you read books as well, because that's like a question I've heard about the Agatha Christie books, is like, how do you read them? Like, because I don't read them analysing the plot, trying to think like, oh, who is the murderer? And oh, he said this, so that must mean this and stuff, which is probably why I can read them so quickly, because if I was stopping and thinking all the time, you know, it would slow me down. So I guess it does kind of depend on the kind of reader you are. In terms of audiobooks, the old trick is you can speed up the playback speed. And again, I think that's almost a learned skill. So, you know, you might start off at like 1.25 times speed, and you can slowly build it up until like, because I can pretty much keep up with double speed now, depending on the narrator. But I normally go between like 1.5 and 1.75. And that actually makes a huge difference, because it basically like, if you can get up to double speed, you're halving the length of the book, you know, so you can read twice as many books effectively.
Yeah, I remember putting it up to like 1.25 just to get used to it. And then I go back down to 1. I don't know why I did it, maybe just as a little trial. And I thought, is this normal speed? Is this what it's normally like? It sounds like slow motion. Yeah.
But
so
part of that, I guess, is like why they make the audio, like when they're making the audiobooks, I think they deliberately do it slowly as well. Because I guess you can always speed it up, but then it's also more accessible for people, or, you know, people might be listening to the audiobook who don't speak English as their first language or whatever. So it makes sense why but it does feel slow to me just listening to a normal speed audiobook.
Yeah, definitely. So like, you've got a lot of reviews that go up. Like, what's your process for doing a review? Because I've seen the tabs at the top, and I've seen in your vlogs you say like, I've got this tab for you know, full review. Like, do you write in them? Do you fold corners? Do you underline? Like, how do you prepare for a review?
When I very first started BookTube, what I'd do is I'd put the tabs in the pages, and then I'd write notes on the tabs to remind myself what I'd tabbed out. But generally it's usually fairly self-explanatory. So what I tend to do now is, just as I'm reading a book, when I read something that I'm like, oh, I want to talk about that, I'll put a tab on that page. And then when I go back through and do my review, I just go to where all the tabs are, I reread that page. And there are times when I've reread it and I can't remember what it was that I tabbed. But in that case, I'm just like, well, it can't have been that important then, you know? So yeah, that's pretty much my technique, is I just try and use like, I've got a little stack here, so I'll use them as my bookmark as I'm reading, and then try and tab them as I go. Although I have been known to use Rizzler as well. So
I use sticky notes, just normal square sticky notes. So I do write on them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, those have got more space as well, because that was one of the problems with these ones, is that they are like super tiny, so you can't really make, you know, many notes in them anyway. But it does, you know, I mean, people do different things. Some people write in the books. I personally don't really have a problem with that. Another thing I've done when I haven't had my tabs is I'll take photos of the page numbers on my phone, and then I'll like tab them out later or whatever. And that kind of comes back to that thing as well of like just being able to read more. Like, I read every opportunity I get. So like public transport is a great one. But like I don't get like sick at reading in cars and stuff. And like I read before bed as well. So there are inevitably times when I forget my sticky tabs, I guess.
Yeah. So how do you, like, when do you know if you're going to do a full review for a book or not? Do you know going in, or does it depend how the book turns out?
Yeah, it depends how the book turns out. So I normally have an idea going into them whether I'm interested in doing one or not. So yeah, it kind of depends, because there have been times where I've tabbed out for like the first 50 odd pages or whatever, and I've just realized actually I don't have enough to say about this or whatever. So it does kind of depend, and I guess it depends on I can be bothered as well, because like there are times when I'll try and tab out and review like everything I'm reading, which I'm pretty much doing at the moment. I might miss like one or two. And then there are other times when I just kind of can't really be bothered. But it's funny because reviews aren't particularly like popular on BookTube as well. But like, so the way I've always approached it is like, it's really like a log of my reading. So like a lot of people will read stuff specifically so they can talk about it on BookTube. Whereas I'm the other way around. I'll read stuff because I want to read it, and then I'll talk about it on BookTube, you know? But that can also get you into trouble because like there have been times when I've picked up books that are like super popular on BookTube. The Shadow of the Wind is probably the most standout one, which I absolutely hated. And I just did my review of it thinking nothing of it. And yeah, you get quite like, it just gets it's got picked up quite a lot because I guess it gets a lot of interaction from people who love Shadow of the Wind, looking for Shadow of the Wind reviews.
What, Shadow of the Wind? Who wrote that?
Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Right. It was a popular one a few years back, probably four or 5 years back. But yeah, and then they'll like hit the dislike button and leave an angry comment and stuff. And then that, in YouTube's eyes, counts as interaction. So then the video gets surfaced more. So
it's good, isn't it? Any interaction's good interaction.
Yeah. But there are a few like that. So there was the Book Thief. I didn't particularly like the Book Thief either. But people will say that like I only read it to do a negative review, and it's like, well, no, I read it because obviously I thought I was going to enjoy it. Actually, with both of those books though, it's kind of interesting because the only reason I actually finished them both was because I was doing buddy reads, and if I don't finish a book, I wouldn't review it. So actually, in a way, it is kind of because of BookTube that I did review them, because I wouldn't have carried on. I wouldn't have like forced myself to keep reading them when I wasn't particularly enjoying them, I guess. But these days, I don't really do that many negative reviews because I've got a lot better at DNFing basically and just calling it a day on a book if I'm not enjoying it. So yeah, I think probably the only reason I would do a negative review now would be if I was reading something that I really disagreed with and that I could have like specific points about why I think it's wrong, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'd quite like to do some freelance work in editing, but I've not done that before, so I'm going to look at doing a bit of like learning about it online. But yeah, when I do, even though reviews don't do that well, I still like doing them because you know, it shows that I'm showing an understanding in what I'm reading, and then breaking down the body of writing. So I mean, that's something I'd like to get into.
I will say on my side, like, especially with YouTube, like, it's things like tags and stuff and hauls tend to, you know, get a lot of the views to begin with, but individual reviews do tend to do pretty well over time. Like quite a few of my most popular videos are reviews I did like 3 or 4 years ago. But then again, I suppose the problem there is a similar thing. Like people will come in and they'll be like, they'll talk about specifics and they'll be like, what did you think of so-and-so? And I'll be like, I can't remember, mate. I read this book 4 years ago, you know? So,
or yeah, something you said in the video and like a fleeting comment and somebody will comment on that and you're like, oh, I'll have to watch this again. I don't know what you're talking about.
Have to back through it to see, yeah.
Oh, something I wanted to ask. The music in your videos, is that something you found somewhere or did you compose that?
Yeah, no, it is something I found somewhere. So, it's I can't even remember what it's called but it was just Creative Commons, like royalty-free music. But it's because it's one of those big debates that was going on probably when I started BookTube. I don't know if people still do it so much now, because back in the day, most of the BookTubers were like, you know, your stereotypical like teenage girls or whatever reading YA, and they would tend to be quite energetic and they'd have like background music and stuff. And then a lot of people started putting background music in their videos, but it doesn't always work. I think you need like the right music, and some people just don't suit music. Like I think if you're a more relaxed, laid back channel, you don't really need music. So I've kind of made this little compromise where yeah, it's just this royalty-free thing that I've been using in the back of like all of my videos, but I try and turn it down pretty much as low as I can, just so it's just kind of there and you hear it occasionally, but you know, so it doesn't overpower what I'm saying, I guess, because you know, that's what people are there for.
Yeah, that's it. I sometimes hear it. Sometimes it's a bit louder than others, and I think it sets a really nice mood for the sort of the vibe that you give off.
Well, that's kind of the goal as well, in that it's one of those things that kind of makes all of the videos kind of consistent with each other as well, you know? Whether people notice it or not, I kind of hope it's like just a little thing that kind of adds to that feel of consistency from video to video. But, excuse me. Again, I haven't said that, like, because my BookTube like really is just my log of my reading and stuff and whatnot. It's an interesting sort of dynamic, because it's like, on the one hand, I want to try and respect people's time who do want to come along and watch videos and stuff, and want to try and, you know, give them the best content that I can. But at the same time, you know, I'm not like a perfectionist with it or anything like that. And really, as I say, the main point of it for me is to have this as a log. Like I'd love the idea that in, you know, 30, 40 years time, I can look back and watch some of these old videos and be like, oh, that's what I was reading in my 20s. And, you know, I just, I think that's why I create the videos, and the fact that other people enjoy them is like a nice benefit, you know?
Yeah. Well, now you're also a writer as well. And you're a hybrid author, aren't you? Because you have self-published stuff and you've got a traditional publishing deal or multiple deals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell us about those books, say, before Meet?
Yeah. So, well, I'll give you the brief history. So,
yeah.
So I mentioned earlier that I had my book blog, socialbookshelves.com. So in about 2014, because I used to get a lot of authors, you know, emailing me asking me if I'd be interested in reviewing them and whatnot. And I reviewed a few books from a press called BookTuber. And that was a hybrid publisher. And what they did was actually really cool. It was almost like crowdfunding. So you could apply to join BookTuber as, like, you could submit your manuscripts as an author, but also cover designers, proofreaders, and editors and marketing managers could all submit their portfolios. And then basically, when you're accepted, you could build a team and you'd put the book out. BookTuber would publish it and whatnot, and then everyone kind of got a royalty share. So it was a really cool, and it made like this kind of community vibe, because everyone was kind of all in it together, and you had like hundreds of authors and whatnot. So yeah, one of the guys from that publishing company, I'd reviewed a few of their books, and I'd reviewed his book and really enjoyed it. And he got in touch to say, like, can you know, we're opening our submissions period. Is that something your readers would be interested in? So I submitted myself, because I'd read a few of their books, I was like impressed with the actual, you know, print quality and the final product and whatnot. And then, yeah, fortunately I was accepted there. I got my first book, which is a horror novella called No Rest for the Wicked. They published that. They also published my poetry collection, Eyes Like Lighthouses When the Boats Come Home. And then they were gearing up to publish Formally, which is my literary fiction novel about a social networking site for the dead. And unfortunately, I guess they went bust. They went defunct, I would say, because basically they'd reached a point at which their revenues had started to drop, and it was like their break-even point where they were like, if we still get out now, we can like fold the company and we'll be okay. So yeah, BookTuber shut down, unfortunately. But through BookTuber, I've met someone called Gwen Gades, who runs a publishing press called Dragon Moon Press, I think. It's DMP anyway. And they specialize in horror stuff. So she was actually offering to take on basically any like BookTuber authors without a home. So she took on No Rest for the Wicked. And then I just sort of went with indie publishing from there, like self-publishing my own stuff. And then when I wrote the first book in my it's like quirky, cozy detective books, the Lightfold books, I submitted that to a publishing house called Encircle Publications. And one of the things I love, they're based in Maine, which is the state that Stephen King's from. So I just think that's so cool. Like, I'm more impressed that they're from Maine than if they were from like New York or like San Francisco or somewhere. But one of their strands is they do mystery novels. So they picked up Driven, and it was actually a republished. So I'd originally self-published it, and then they republished it through their house, and they've published the Tower Hill Terror as well. So they're now kind of, for me, they're the home of the Lightfold books. So you know, I'll go back to those with each new Lightfold book. And then, as you say, there's then Meet, which is my newest, which I'm back to self-publishing because it wasn't a Lightfold book, basically.
How does it work when you get something that's already out that you've self-published that then gets picked up? What's the deal with the contracts there and stuff like that? Not yeah, it's obviously, but
it's not too difficult. I think people probably would think it's more difficult than it is. They basically had a slightly different contract for stuff that had been previously self-published, and the only other stuff was, again, because I had all the self-publishing set up, they were just like, can you make sure that the old version gets removed from Amazon and whatnot so that they're only stuck in the new version, which is fair enough. And that was pretty much about it. We did go through like another round of editing, but we didn't really need it. So it is like, the text is very, very slightly different. but I think it was all like minor stuff, like, you know, 2 words didn't have a hyphen between them and things like that. And then, well, it's as well, because whether I self-publish or not, I work with my editor, who's called Pamelise Harris. And so she's always gone through usually at least 2 rounds of edits, usually, but most often 3, before I release it. So when Driven came out, I'd written it, I'd done my own edits on it, and then it'd gone, you know, to Pam, back to me, back to Pam, back to me, back to Pam, back to me. Then it went through proofreading. Then it got published, like the self-publishing version. And then when Encircle picked it up, it went through another round of essentially proofreading. So yeah, it goes through like a lot of different rounds and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it was. Basically, some presses will specifically say like they don't want to republish stuff that's already been published or whatever, which is kind of fair enough. For me, just there's a big time gap between when something gets accepted and when it gets published. So for example, when Driven first got republished, I was about to publish, it was going to be called Netflix and Kill. It's now called The Tower Hill Terror, which is the second book. So I was about to self-publish it. And then just through like the delays of going through their publishing process and whatnot, it basically ended up coming out about 18 months later. So that's kind of the advantage of self-publishing first and then trying to find a publisher. I'm kind of the opinion, say with me, say if I send that out to horror publishers now and they say, we would have loved to have published this, but you know, unfortunately you've previously published it, blah, blah, blah. I'll just be like, well, I'll just write you another book, you know? So yeah, I think that's my personal approach. But also The Martian by Andy Weir, that was first self-published as well. And then Random House took it on. So I don't think you got anything to worry about by self-publishing first, personally.
Yeah, did the cover change when you got picked up? Yeah,
it did. And so for the second book as well, I'd already, because I've got a cover designer I work with, so she's called Larch Gallagher, and she did the cover design for Meat. I'm trying to think what other one she did. So she did the first cover for Driven, and there was one for Netflix and Kill as well before that even got accepted. But then we were kind of able to, you know, they created their own version of the cover basically, but they could use my covers as a guide to roughly the kind of thing I wanted, roughly the kind of effect I was going for. And like I have this very specific thing, and that as long as it's in my power, I will never have a book with my name on it, which has got a character shown on the front, because it drives me nuts. I hate it. Like, I don't mind actually, like I'd rather have a TV or film cover than one of like just, you know, a stylized version of a character or whatever, because I don't know, I think for me the joy is of imagining the characters. So like the closest I'd want to like an actual character would be like a silhouette of somebody or something like that. Just because I think as soon as you start putting characters on the fronts of books, you start to, I don't know, you kind of have an undue amount of influence over the way people imagine the story, I think.
Yeah, from a cover designer doing character pictures, it's like fan art from someone who's not a fan.
Exactly, yeah. Especially again in I suppose in the indie world, because there's not a huge amount of like financial reward in it. So yeah, if you're a cover designer for Random House, like it's your job. They'll give you time to read the book as many times as you want, and you'll get all the time you need with the author and all this stuff, all the resources you need. Whereas like if you're an indie cover designer, you know, you're probably charging someone 2 hours of your time for a book cover or whatever. You can't read it and take detailed notes and do all this extra stuff. So yeah, I suppose it's about working within the constraints as well.
Yeah. So when those books got picked up, did they pick all of them up in like a bundle, or did you do that separately? Sort
of. Well, they basically picked the first one up, and I think again because it needed so little editing, they were very complimentary about it. And so they sort of said like, you know, feel free, you know, to submit future stuff to us. And then and I was like, well, as it happens, I've got a second book, so I can send that to you. And you know, we signed the contract and whatnot, but we didn't sign the contract until we went to print and started publishing it, I guess. And like it went through the edits there. But there was, I guess, like a verbal kind of agreement, like unless either party is unhappy, we'll probably keep going. And actually, so I've got a third book in that series, which is it's a short story collection that basically shows Lightfold's history and how he became the character that he is. So it goes back in time and stuff, and that's gone through editing with my editor and is ready to go. And they want to see it, and I'm kind of like, I don't know. Like, some of the stories in it I don't think are great. So I think for a start, I think I'd need to trim out some of the stories, but then that reduces the length of it and then would make it like not as long as the other books. But also, because it goes into the past, in my head, like, the longer I leave it, almost the better. Like, it'd be better to do it after there's been 10 books in the series. Like, then it has more of an impact to go back to the past, you know? So, but my current work in progress is the 3rd novel in that series. So I'm hoping to, again, have that over to them at some point next year. And it's pretty much a formality that they'll publish it. I can't see any reason why they wouldn't. But also, equally, I'm not in a contract that says that I have to publish with those. So say they turn it down, it doesn't mean that they own the series and I can't then publish it. It just means I'd have to self-publish that particular book in the series or whatever.
Did you sell like everything with that, like audio, film, and ebook rights, or was it just print?
Just print. So, and it's for a certain amount of time. I think for like 5 years or something it was. So funnily enough, actually, they have been in touch recently. So I had another contract through because they're going to be working with a company that produces audiobooks. And they're basically going to work in partnership. So this company's going to do 30 books from Encircle's list or whatever. So they sent over a contract for me to sign to do with that. And I sent it back over and I haven't heard anything, but I missed the deadline they gave, but I don't know how strict the deadline was. And the reason I missed was because it was like a 20-page contract. So I wanted to make sure I'd read through it all, and I was, pretty busy at the time. But it seemed pretty reasonable. So in terms of things like film rights, for example, I still maintain the film rights. I think there is a clause in the contract that says, like, basically, if Encircle were to sell the film rights on my behalf to Warner Brothers, they'd get like 30% commission or something on it, which, fair enough, So, but it doesn't work the other way around as well. So if I sell the film rights, they don't get a commission, although I probably would. Like, you can have 10%. That'd be nice.
Yeah. So I want to move on to your short story in Local Haunts, A Stone's Throw, which is a piece of historical fiction.
Yeah.
Have you written historical fiction before out of the books you've written?
I've written like a historical fiction short story before. And so what appealed to me about it, and I think the story itself probably shows it as well, is like, I was also at the same time as trying to do like a historical story, I guess. I wanted the actual feeling of the story to feel as though, something Wilkie Collins had written 70 years ago or something, So I wanted it to not feel contemporary in the way it was written as well. And that's kind of what I did with this other short story. So I got a short story called The Ploughman, and it's one I did at uni. I actually didn't get a very good grade for it, but the lecturer wrote in the notes, basically they were teaching us the 8-point story arc, which is, where you have like conflict resolution and then you have the climax at the end. And it's like the thing that like Star Wars famously follows and stuff. And but the problem was they didn't teach us that until about week 8 in the course, and I had already written my story by then, and that was one of the things they graded us on. So I think it was like I couldn't get a 2-1, or I couldn't get a first, or whatever it was. I was like 1 mark short because I hadn't used the 8-point story arc. But they did say it was a very good story, and it is a very good story. I'm still really proud of it. It's like the best thing I wrote at that age, I think. And that's a historical fiction short story about a farmer during the outbreak of the First World War. And basically he goes out of his way to help his neighbours. And then when there's like a horrible storm and his farm gets wrecked and his crops are ruined, his neighbours are like, oh, well, times are lean. I'm sorry, there's a war on. We can't help you. And then he starves to death, basically. So very delightful. But yeah, so those are the only 2 like historical stories that I've written. I think for Local Haunts, because the prompt was like, like the sort of the ghostly stories from your part of the world, that's really the best ghostly story that Wickham has. In some ways, it actually brings together like the 2 ghost stories that we have, but they all happen like so far like back in time that it made sense for it to be a historical fiction story, you know.
What went into like preparing and researching then for a historical piece of fiction?
A lot of Googling, yeah. It's funny because I vividly remember when I wrote that story as well. It was actually I'd left Wickham for a while because I basically was having some woman troubles. So I was like, I need to get away from Wickham. So I went to stay at my mum's house, and I wrote it all there, which is really strange because it was like the one time I was away, I then wrote about the place, you know. But but like it's also like West Wickham is sort of like a village on the outskirts of Wickham as well, so it's not quite where I live. But I'm familiar with the places and like the Hellfire Caves that are mentioned in it. I've been on like the whole, they have it open to tourists and whatnot, so I've been around there. And like the pub that it's set in, I've been to the pub because that's still open. So a few of the locations I was okay with. And then the actual ghost stories themselves, I basically Googled the stories and read a bunch of different blogs and various different things people had written about them, because everybody has a slightly different version of the story, and mine kind of continues that as well. So like the story that I used in Local Haunts is based on this local ghost story, but it's not just the ghost story, if that makes sense. Like it's not just a retelling of a ghost story or whatever. It's like it's basically like two ghost stories melded together with an extra little storyline holding them together, I guess. But so I had to do a lot of research on that, and then for like certain specific things. So Suki the barmaid sings a song at one point in it, so obviously I had to make sure it was like historically accurate, and that a serving girl in a village would have known this song. So
the language you used I thought was interesting, even for the song, or just when the characters were speaking as well, and dialogue.
Yeah, again, I was just trying to reflect that sort of time period, and I guess like the class differences as well. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's also like very recognizable. Like that entire ghost story could really take place today. I mean, instead of having somebody, you know, passing through on horseback, they're passing through in a car or whatever. But the actual story is pretty timeless, I would say. Like, yeah, like even like with the, you know, the boys teasing the girl and stuff, I think it's all, you can still kind of relate to that today, I think.
Yeah. Is there a hammering on your end, or is that my neighbour?
That is on my end, I think. Yeah, I live by a busy main road. I think it might actually be, there's just on the other side of me, there's a car repair place, so I reckon they're probably doing something on a car.
Yeah, I live next door to Bob the Builder, so he's got his car jacked up every Saturday, and he's doing DIY every other day. So
all right.
I thought that might be
it could be both of us.
So you've pretty much just released a book not so long ago, Meat. And what can you tell us about that?
Well, Meat has been a labour of love for sure. So I started working on that in about 2015. It was before I went freelance. Like I specifically remember talking to people at work about it. So it's a horror novel set on a factory farm, and it basically follows a disease outbreak on a factory farm. The quarantine's called in. So it makes it kind of a timely book. And actually the fact that I was doing my last rounds of edits of it earlier this year, it did mean I could sneak in a few like sort of references to COVID and stuff. But this is also like, it really annoys me. Like I've seen people say like, oh yeah, like COVID's definitely a conspiracy because like, you know, how could Bill Gates have known that a pandemic was coming in this speech he gave 5 years ago? And it's like, but I knew a pandemic was coming in a book I started writing 5 years ago. It's just like the scientific consensus was that a pandemic is coming. Like, so I can't pretend to have seen the future or anything. I think I just sort of looked out in the timing of when it all came out, I guess. But yeah, it's very sort of Stephen King inspired. I think a lot of my different books, you can see like the authors, or at least like the movements that have inspired them. So like my poems are very like beat poetry inspired, I would say. The cozy detectives are obviously very like Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, you know, Sherlock Holmes inspired. And so Meat, I guess, is my more Stephen Kingy one. I've also got one coming up soon, which is a more Terry Pratchett-y one as well, which I'm quite excited about.
But like Terry Pratchett, don't you? I've seen that in a lot of your videos.
Yeah, he was one of my big influences growing up. So Well, he kind of lended himself to it naturally, because this one that's coming up, I've been describing it as Spinal Tap meets Lord of the Rings. So it's about a band that are going around on tour, and they're actually monsters, but everyone just thinks they're people in monster suits. And so just the fact of mixing that kind of, because that's how I saw it with Spinal Tap with Lord of the Rings, and I started writing it, and I was like, well, it's got to have bits of Terry Pratchett, because it is basically comic fantasy, and he's like the master in the field, I suppose. But I try and subvert it and stuff, like the same with things like Lord of the Rings. Like I use a lot of those like fantasy tropes, but then try and subvert them again. So like, for example, the Dark Lord, instead of, being this like badass Sauron or whatever, he's a record label executive, and like his goal, like his evil goal is to part children from their pocket money and stuff. So like, it's just messing around, I guess, with those tropes. And that's kind of what I did with me, with like a few sort of Stephen Kingy ideas, and I wanted to write something a bit more epic in scale, so it's like my longest book, and with like quite a large cast of characters as well. So it's quite ambitious to work on it, and yeah, it took me a lot longer than I was expecting. So as I say, probably about 5 years from start to finish, and now that it's out, it's just a sense of relief, to be honest. I'm just like, oh, thank God for that.
And you had to research a bit of that as well, because you're also a vegan. So did some of that play into that?
Well, so when I started it, I was vegetarian, and it was the research that I did on it that made me decide to go vegan, because I saw enough stuff like so for example, I'll try not to give any spoilers of the book, but there's a scene involving a chicken shredder, and basically that's part of the egg industry. When they're laying eggs to try and breed more layer chickens, obviously only the females can lay eggs, so quite often the male chicks are basically just ground up. And like this is shit that like I didn't know. So I'm there like being vegetarian, being like, oh, I'm helping the animals, and then I'm like, but I'm still eating eggs. And then as soon as I learn something like that, I'm like, well now I can't, like now I might as well either go and have a steak, or I've got to go vegan. Like it doesn't make sense for me to then like stay in that like middle ground, I guess. So but I mean, I'd already done, because I'd seen quite a lot of like various documentaries, even going back to things like Earthlings and stuff. So I've seen a fair few documentaries, I've read a fair few books, so I just had to kind of step it up. And yeah, like I had to do quite a lot of fairly bleak research into like exactly how factory farms tend to be run. What I will say is that there's no real equivalent to the factory farm in my book. Well, there's no real equivalent to it anywhere in the world. There's definitely not in the UK. In America, they do have the mega factory farms, but they tend to focus on individual animals. So it'll be an individual mega dairy, or like a massive chicken house or something. So places don't tend to have all the different animals together. But yeah, like it's definitely the American model is the like it's pretty messed up. I mean, there's one of the books is called Eternal Treblinka, and it basically says how American factory farming took ideas from German concentration camps to make the production of meat more efficient. And it's just like, that's messed up, like, so, and I've been talking to Charlie Heathcote on BookTuber here, because he's vegetarian actually, but his dad's a farmer, and I'm like, if all of the farms were like your dad's farms, we would have much less of a problem. Like those farms aren't really the problems. In fact, those farms are being pushed out of business by these massive mega dairies. And like, like another thing in America, there's a lot of undocumented immigrants working in these things. And like, to me, that's a human rights issue. Like, I don't, because obviously I'm vegan, so you can be like, well, he's just arguing for the animals and whatnot, but it's like, especially in places like Texas, they'll have like a lot of undocumented Mexican immigrants working in slaughterhouses. The point being that they can't have a union, they can be exposed to like dangerous conditions, and like they can't say no, because what choice do they have? They'll lose their job, they'll get reported to immigration, and they'll get deported. So there's just, and like, big farms setting up near like small American towns, and suddenly all the kids in those towns getting sick and stuff. It's like, yeah, it's mad what's happening in America. I'm surprised more people aren't like annoyed about it, to be honest.
A lot of things can go under the radar, can't they?
Yeah, exactly. And like, and as I say, the UK, we're nowhere near as bad. Basically, the worst one at the moment is essentially America, and pretty soon China's going to overtake America if they keep doing what America's doing, basically. But obviously, I mean, produce gets shipped all around the world, so it's not you know, unless you're specifically going out of your way to buy from your local farmer or whatever, you're probably part of this horrible system. But
yeah, and do animals that are in those places get antibiotics as well?
Yeah, they're routinely fed them. I think the statistic is that 80% of antibiotics gets fed to animals, and it's actually not to treat illness, it's to essentially encourage growth. So like things like chickens, for example, they grow a lot faster than they would naturally grow, and part of that is just because there's so much antibiotics in their grain, which is why as well a lot of people are saying, like, you know, we're all obviously very topical talking about the coronavirus, and you know, most of these like new pandemics tend to be like, you know, like swine flu or avian flu or whatever. It tends to be animal led. It's just like, if you get lots of animals in one place, the more you have, the more likely it's going to happen, you know. But that, to be fair, like that could still happen without farming. If everyone was vegan, you could still get like mad bat disease. So, but yeah, the big worry is antibiotic resistance. If humans become resistant to antibiotics, we're screwed. Like, it gets to the point where if you have to have a tooth removed, you might die, and like it's not good. So we probably shouldn't be feeding that much antibiotics to animals, really. But what do I know?
Yeah. So I mean, one of the last things. Sorry,
I was going to say we probably shouldn't be putting as much pesticide on vegetables either. But
no, that's another thing.
But I don't concern myself as much with that, because that's the thing as well. Is like with the, you know, I suppose with this, I talk very much from like the animal rights point of view, but like there are other reasons for adopting like a less meat heavy diet, like health and the environment are the other two, really. So I don't really care about pesticides and stuff, because I'm just like, yeah, whatever, like just don't make animals suffer. Whereas other people might be the other way around, where they're just like, actually, I don't care if animals suffer, but the fact that you're doing it in these conditions really puts me off my food or whatever. So there's a lot of different, I guess, ways to approach it. But I think it's something everybody should think about. Just like my goal with meat has never been to, you know, convert people to veganism or whatever. It's more to make people think about where their food comes from. So I think if people do that, that's the result.
Yeah, I've noticed you read quite widely, and you primarily write in like horror, is that right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
but
more so than any other genre. Yeah,
but you read quite a varied selection of stuff, don't you?
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to talk about was you're sort of a bookseller, an online bookseller.
Yeah,
you do eBay stuff, don't you?
Yeah, well, this is quite a recent thing, and actually it came specifically from, I used to be very obsessive with my book collection, and I'd keep everything that I read, and it was all alphabetical, author surname, and then book title. And it got to the point where if I'd read a new Isaac Asimov book and there'd be no room on that shelf, and I'd have to move all of the A authors along, which meant moving all the B authors along, etc., etc. So it got to the point, like, every probably once or twice a month I'd probably have to spend an hour moving all of the books along, you know, and it was just driving me a bit nuts. And there are so many of them that I knew I'd never reread, so I just started putting some up on eBay just to try and clear out a bit of space, really. And then that kind of snowballed. I guess I got a little bit addicted to doing it as well. So I've basically eventually gone through my whole book collection and just listed all of the books I have that I don't mind if I sell them. And, you know, kind of the goal for this as well is to raise a bit of money. And as I said, I've been doing as much freelance stuff as I can. I'd love to like try and save up enough for a deposit to get my own house, basically. And then if I could do that, I'd then potentially rebuild a book collection. But instead of like, all of my books are basically like charity shop books or cheapest copies or whatever. So I'd be like much more selective, and, you know, I'd get like really nice editions of things. So that's kind of the long-term plan with all that. But at the same time, obviously, I'm still reading new stuff. So I've started buying like job lots on eBay now as well. So I've actually got another one coming to me soon. It's a job lot of 50 mixed paperbacks. And I think there were 2 or 3 books in there that I want to read. And I think I bought it for about 22 quid or something. So, you know, the goal is to then sell them back. Oh, I also found some of the Agatha Christie facsimile editions in a charity shop not long before this second lockdown. And I think there were 8 or 9 of them for £1.50 each. And the other day, 2 of them sold for £10 each. So like, bought them from the charity shop, made a bit of profit. So you know, I guess it all helps. And maybe one day I would consider, like, because I don't really think of it as a business, but it's kind of one of those, it's like a side hustle, you know. So and again, that, like, with my writing and stuff and making a living, that's kind of a big part of it, I guess. Like, a lot of it does come from the freelance work, but also I want to work on you know, book revenue, which anything that I can get as well, which is just like automatic each month, is great. So like book sales again, and yeah, if I'm making money from the eBay shop, if it makes enough money to make it worthwhile turning into a business, I potentially would. Although even then, I think if I did that, I'd probably then hire somebody else to run it for me. Like, I think that would be my threshold for considering it a business, would be if it got to the point where it was making enough money and there was enough work to be done that I could hire someone, even part-time, to run it, you know?
Yeah, what's the process then of selling stuff on eBay? Can you get a book and scan the barcode and all the details populate in there, or do you have to type it all in each book?
You can do it quite a few different ways, and there are a lot of automated tools as well. I actually basically just search for the book, see what it's going for, like, because I tend to find the right edition as well. See what other people are selling it for, and then undercut them very slightly. That tends to be my strat. But also, because you get to know after a while, like, how big the books are going to be in the parcels and stuff, so how much it's going to cost to post them. So I have like my minimum thresholds that I won't sell them for less than and stuff. But yeah, I also do it. I tend to do it while I'm editing BookTube videos. So I'll have my screen split and I'll be editing the video on the one side of the screen and just sort of slowly adding new listings on the other side of the screen.
Do you have like a bunch of boxes in your place, or a certain type of like paper that you need to wrap them in? How does that happen?
I've actually got right next to me. I get rolls of this parcel paper, but I get like an industrial size roll of it. So I spend like, I don't know, like, I think it's like about 10 quid for like 300 meters or something ridiculous. So yeah, so I use that, and then the Royal Mail have got things so you can weigh and post from home as well. So I literally just wrap it, weigh it, pay for it, and then just pop it through the letterboxes. So yeah, it's pretty easy to do. Actually, the problem is more that, like, around my house, because I've got all these books and they're no longer in alphabetical order as well. So the problem is often finding the specific book that somebody's ordered, you know?
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard of Sean Bithell. He's a bookseller in Scotland, and he's got 3 books. His 3rd book just come out, and on his first 2, he wrote in them, like, overnight and stuff, what orders had come in online, like online orders, and then a number, and then underneath that he'd wrote the orders that he'd fulfilled or that he'd managed to find, and it was all, not always, but like often less than the numbers of orders that have come in, because he couldn't find them in the shop, either because they were filed in the wrong place or the customers had just put them back in the wrong place. Yeah,
it's exactly like that. So what I mean, I don't really actually have a system. I started with a system and then it's gone a bit mental now, but and actually I do plan to reorder it. So, because there are certain authors where I have loads of books by the same author, so I can put them all in like a pile and whatnot. But at the moment, I actually don't have enough book space on my shelves to do that, if that makes sense. Like, I need space to be able to move stuff around. But yeah, what I tend to do is I have my list of all the books that have been ordered, and then I'll go around all of the shelves slowly and look at all the books, grab all the ones I can find, and then that's my like pass for the day. And then the next day I'll go through and do it again, because I have like a 2 to 3 day dispatch window as well. So, you know, if I still haven't found it after the 3rd day, that's when I'm sort of message people being like, I'm very sorry, but
yeah, I've got no system with my book filing. I've got like collections next to normal books. This is my TBR, this big pile in this corner here.
Right, nice.
It's just there for the time being. It's not got any structure to it. So, stuff that I've not read over there. So when you're sending stuff to, like, when you get an order, do you have like do you print your own labels? Do you write on the paper that you wrap it in? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, you print your own labels. So again, it's all through Royal Mail. So you can you put in the weight and then the size of the parcel, and then you can print the label off and you just stick it to it. But what I do is when I wrap the stuff, because I tend to do it in batches. So I'll wrap the stuff and I'll write on the label on the package what it is. So, you know, but it's always shorthand as well. So I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know, like I don't know, if it was The Catcher in the Rye, I'd just write Catcher or something like that. But it does sometimes mean like I've written like Christie for Agatha Christie, and then realise, well, hang on a minute, I've wrapped 4 Agatha Christie books here. So which one is it? So sometimes it does backfire.
Which address do I put on this one?
Yeah, exactly.
Have you had to unwrap them a load of times?
Yeah, I have in the past, here and there, yeah.
And with Royal Mail, like, if you get this going a bit, do you get like a special rate for postage, or?
Yeah, there's a threshold, and I can't remember what it is, but I've not quite met it yet. So, I mean, I would say, because also you got to think, like, in terms of revenue, I'm probably getting like £400 a month of books or something, but actually probably 200 of that is postage and eBay fees, so it's only like 200 profit. But yeah, I'm still not quite at the threshold of getting their like business account or whatever. I think it's you pay a certain amount a month and then you get a certain % off, I think it might be, actually. And so I worked it out, and I was like, at the moment I'm not posting enough for it to be worth me doing it.
What are you finding that does quite well for you on eBay?
That's a good question. It depends. I mean, anything that's like a high quality one, so again, those Agatha Christie facsimile books work quite well. Rare books work all right. I actually bought this job lot off somebody of old like fantasy and sci-fi books from the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, I saw that haul.
Yeah, that was a good one, yeah. Well, a lot of those, because again of the time that the books came out, they can be quite hard to track down. So quite a few of them are worth, you know, a tenner and stuff. So I would say those have been probably the best ones for me, because they're not necessarily super popular as well. So it might take a while for some of them to sell, but they'll always sell for pretty good prices when they do sell.
Yeah. So we're pretty much done. What are you reading right now? A couple of quick questions to end with.
So I'm reading A Piano in the Pyrenees by Tony Hawks. He's like a comic travel writer. He's pretty much the guy who inspired, like, you know, the generation of comedians like Dave Gorman, who did like humorous travel shows. So Tony Hawks' first book was called Round Ireland with a Fridge, and it was literally his friend dared him to go around the outskirts of Ireland while carrying a fridge. And he did it successfully and made lots of friends, and like people were giving him and his fridge a lift and stuff. So in this one, A Piano in the Pyrenees, he basically went off to the Pyrenees for a skiing holiday with his friend. His friend twisted his ankle right at the start, and so he decided to buy a house there instead. So he's just bought a house in this like small village in the Pyrenees, and he's taking a piano over there to learn to play the piano. So it's just like, yeah, this I guess it's like his midlife crisis as well, because he's like 42 at this point. So, yeah. But it's very humorously written, and yeah, just what I needed, like a nice upbeat book.
What is your favourite book?
Well, I always say it's Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. That's definitely the book that made me fall in love with reading. And actually, I recently got a tattoo of a Panzerbjorn, one of the armoured bears from it as well. Pretty much, again, as a gesture towards it being my favourite book is what I tend to answer with.
Is that in the series? One of the series?
His Dark Materials.
Yes, yeah, that.
Yeah, the first one there. So, and I think I remember I would have been about 8 or 9, I think, when I first read it. And I was off school sick, and my dad had taken me to my grandma's, and she'd gotten it out from the library for me. And I just fell in love with it. And then, because the second book was just about out at the time, so I read that. And then I had like a 3-year wait for the third book to come out, and it was just that wait killed me, you know. But I think it was those books that made me realise just how powerful writing could be, and they're what made me both really get into reading, but also what kind of inspired me when I got into writing as well.
Who's your favourite author?
Tough. My most read author, I think, is Terry Pratchett, because I think he has the most books. Favourite, well, then I think I'd probably break it down. Favourite living author would be Stephen King, and then probably Agatha Christie for favourite dead author. I mean, other favourites as well, like Graham Greene. I've read loads of his work, really big fan of his. Like Charles Bukowski. Stephen King is my favourite living author is a lot easier, because most of the authors that I really like are dead. So,
see, I'm not that well read on King. I've read maybe 6 of his books, The Institute and The Outsider, so they're fairly recent. And then I did listen to Desperation and The Stand, And The Stand I DNF'd with like 20 hours left, and I still it's like a 47-hour thing or something. Like, where would you sort of say to maybe give another go to King? I do like the I did read The Gunslinger as well, which I quite liked.
The Stand is probably my favourite King novel, but you would have been at the point. There's like a notorious point about 2/3 of the way through where it gets super slow. But I really like The Stand personally.
I gave that up. Like, if I was reading it as well, if it wasn't the audiobook, if I was reading that, there's like a 49-minute chapter of where it's this old woman who's like 100 and something years old.
Yeah, Mother Abigail.
Like, oh dear. I mean, does she have a significant part in the story? I mean, I was hoping she did, because I thought like, this has got to be here for something. This 49-minute chapter of just shuffling about.
He basically does the typical King thing of like slowly establishing all of the characters and whatnot, so that at the end, like stuff that this is what gets me with King is he writes stuff by the end of his stories that wouldn't have made any sense at the start of the story, but because he's done all of the groundwork, you're like, okay, it's like weird, whatever it is, like this weird time paradoxy stuff. I believe it. Like, I mean, I think actually The Institute, I read that recently as well, and I really enjoyed that. If you like The Institute, definitely give Firestarter a go, because it's got very similar vibes with like psychic kids, government, mad people. That's also kind of what inspired Stranger Things. If you like The Gunslinger, the second book in that series is The Drawing of the Three, and that was my favourite book of the series. And also a lot of people say they didn't like The Gunslinger but carried on and enjoyed the series. So I think if you enjoyed it, you're definitely going to enjoy the series. I mean, I'm with you. I actually also enjoyed The Gunslinger when I first read it as well. A good one to read,
though, wasn't it? It was like a
it was short.
It was like a novella.
Yeah. The lengths of the books in that series are all a bit off. There's even one where he literally just stops halfway through the story, and like I think he says he was like, I kind of hit a block with it and didn't know where it was going, so he just published it, and then like it's like 11 years later he carried it on or whatever. So it is quite a strange series, but definitely worth getting to the end of. What's it called? The Long Walk, which is one of his Bachman books. I thought that was really good. It's quite dystopian, and it's a bit like dystopian reality TV. Imagine if it was like Big Brother, except instead of Big Brother, they had to keep on walking, and if they stopped walking, they'd get shot in the back of the head. That's kind of the plot to it. And then we start to see why the different characters are doing it in the first place, because I think you had to specifically volunteer to do it and stuff. And the idea being like, basically this, dystopian society is so bad that the 1 in 100 chance of winning it is worth the 99% chance that you're going to get shot in the head, I guess. But yeah, I mean, he's got loads of great books. So there's and everyone likes different ones as well, I guess. So yeah, you could always give some of his shorter ones a try as well, just because again, they'll be easier to get through. So even something like Cujo or something's not particularly long, as opposed to like, for example, one of his more recent ones, which I really enjoyed, was 11/22/63, which is when it's to do with like the Kennedy assassination. Yeah. But it's like super long, so I would probably recommend saving the longer of King's books till you've read a fair amount of King, and you kind of
he has spoken a lot about his stories are character driven a lot of the time. And I don't mind character work, but I guess I'm a bit greedy because I also like a bit of plot, so I can see what's happening.
Well, also because they all tend to interlink and stuff as well. So again, the shorter ones might be better for things like that, because you start to pick up some of the links, so that then when you do get to something like It, for example, you're already familiar actually with some of the minor side characters and some of the locations, because he's used them in other books and stuff. So I mean,
I liked The Outsider. I thought that was really fast paced. It had a plot because it was what's happened here with this person who could be in two places at once, and you sort of knew where we were going with it, and it was fast and that. But the part Desperation was good, but there was a lot of establishing scenes where it was like, wow, are we getting to what's going on or what?
Which one was Desperation? Because I'm here and I'm like, did I read that one?
Desperation. It's so you get a load of different characters who are introduced driving down this road through like a desert road, like say Nevada or something. I'm not sure if it's Nevada or.
Yes, I remember. Yeah, and they go to the town.
It's the police. It's this town desperation. Yeah, the policeman who sort of has been possessed by something.
Yeah, that one was all right. That was like one of his like neither good nor bad ones for me, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, also,
I've never really read King, but that was one of the first, maybe the first one I actually listened to this. But after I read his On Writing book.
Yeah, On Writing was good. Yeah. Oh, that's the point. You could go for like things like Carrie and stuff like that. That would be an interesting one to read.
That's his first book, isn't it?
That was his first one, yeah. But it's quite short as well. But it is actually pretty good. So.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, that's all. Cheers for your time. I mean, it's gone a lot longer than I expected.
It's all right. Yeah, no. As soon as we start talking books, like I'm just try and stop me, you know.
No, I appreciate it. Cheers for your time. Cool. Short notice as well.
Yeah, no.
You offer people can buy your book, and if they buy it from you, you sign it and send them stuff. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a signed book with a pen and a bookmark. I've had to adjust the prices a little bit, I guess, for inflation, I don't know, to keep it all in line with everything. So it's currently £8 plus £1.99 delivery, or for meat, unfortunately, because meat's longer, it's £10 plus £1.99 delivery, and that's UK delivery. I can do international for people as well, but obviously it puts the price up. But yeah, then you get a signed copy of the book, you get a pen, and you get a bookmark as well. And obviously, if people are interested in buying multiple ones, I can potentially, do discounts and whatnot, or like free postage or whatever. So message me online.
I was going to say, how do you do that?
Yeah, people are free to get in touch with me. I mean, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, DMs are fine as well. YouTube comments will work, or you can just email me, danecobain@hotmail.com. That's the easiest one. And then, normally I just do it through PayPal.
Cool. So do you want to shout out your socials and your YouTube channel, and then we'll call it a day?
Cool. Yeah. Well, pretty much everything is just Dane Cobain. So, with the exception of Facebook, my public Facebook page is facebook.com/Dane Cobain Music, because /Dane Cobain is my personal page. Twitter's at Dane Cobain, Instagram at Dane Cobain, youtube.com/Dane Cobain, and my channel is Dane Reads. My book blog, which I mentioned earlier, is socialbookshelves.com. There's danecobain.com as well. And yeah, I've got like Amazon and Goodreads author pages and whatnot as well.
Cool. Thanks a lot for your time.
Cool.
No worries.
Cheers.